The night in the low country of the South did not possess a true silence. Instead, it was a thick, humid tapestry of sound, the rhythmic pulsing of cicadas, the distant, mournful hoot of a barred owl, and the heavy dampness of the air that seemed to cling to the skin like a wet shroud. For Samuel, a man whose back bore the raised silver scars of a decade of toil, this night was different from the thousands that had come before it. This night, the darkness was not a prison, it was a sanctuary. He stood at the edge of the cypress swamp, the moss-draped branches hanging like tattered ghosts in the moonlight. Behind him lay the plantation, a world of ordered rows and forced labor. Ahead lay the unknown, 1,000 miles of shadow, river, and mountain. He had no map, no compass, and no shoes. He had only the North Star, a steady, cold pinprick of light that promised a world where his name belonged to him and him alone. The breath of the swamp. Samuel stepped into the water. It was black and cool, swirling round his ankles with a gentle, treacherous pull. He moved with the deliberation of a crane, lifting each foot slowly to avoid the splash that might alert a distant sentry or a prowling hound. The Maryland campaign was raging hundreds of miles to the north, a clash of iron and fire that was shaking the foundations of the world. But here, in the heart of the woods, the war was silent. It was a war of nerves, a war of inches. He looked up. Through the canopy of ancient oaks, he found it, Perilous, the North Star. To the masters, it was just a navigational point. To Samuel, it was the eye of God watching over the weary. "Just keep your eyes on the light, Sam," he whispered to himself, his voice barely a tremor in the wind. "The light don't lie, the light don't change." As he waded deeper, the smell of the swamp rose to meet him, the scent of decaying leaves, sweet jasmine, and the sharp metallic tang of stagnating water. Every crack of a dry twig under the surface sounded like a pistol shot in his ears. He stopped, frozen, as a white-tailed deer broke through the thicket 50 yards away. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, hollow drumming. In this journey, survival was a matter of becoming part of the landscape, a shadow moving within shadows. The weight of memory. To stay awake and focused, Samuel let his mind drift back to the stories he'd heard whispered in the quarters, stories of the underground, a road made of handshakes and hidden cellar doors. He thought of his mother, whose face was a fading charcoal sketch in his memory, and the way she used to sing about the gourd. "Follow the drinking gourd," she would hum while shelling peas. He finally understood. The Big Dipper was a cup, and the cup poured its hope directly into the North Star. By the time the moon reached its zenith, Samuel had covered 5 miles. His feet were cut by sharp stones and bitten by the unseen denizens of the water. But he felt a strange, intoxicating lightness. For the first time in 24 years, no one knew where he was. He was a man missing from the ledger, a ghost in the census. But the peril was only beginning. The Maryland soil was being soaked in blood by armies, but the path to get there was guarded by patrollers and men who made a living hunting human shadows. He found a hollowed-out log near the bank of a slow-moving creek and crawled inside. The wood was damp and smelled of earthworms, but it was a fortress. He closed his eyes. The image of the North Star burned into his retinas. He didn't sleep, not truly. He drifted in that thin space between exhaustion and vigilance, listening to the baying of hounds that had plagued his nightmares since childhood. The lantern in the clearing. The second night of Samuel's journey brought a biting chill that the Maryland marshes were famous for. The humidity of the day had vanished, replaced by a thin, ghostly mist that clung to the knees of the cypress trees. Samuel moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic pace, step
Pause, breathe. Step, pause, breathe. His mind began to play tricks on him in the dark. The snapping of a twig became the cocking of a rifle, and the rustle of wind through dry leaves became the footsteps of a bounty hunter. As he reached a fork in a narrow deer trail, a smell hit him, not the rot of the swamp, but something domestic, wood smoke, and beneath it, the faint, sweet scent of baking corn pones. For a man who had eaten nothing but wild berries and raw crawfish for 48 hours, the smell was a physical blow. He crouched low, his heart thumping against the damp soil. Through the thicket, he saw it, a small, crooked cabin built of rough-hewn logs. It sat in a clearing where the trees seemed to pull back as if afraid of the light spilling from the single window. The secret sign. Samuel remembered the instructions whispered to him by an old man named Moses back on the plantation. Look for the house with the quilt on the fence. If the pattern is a log cabin with a black center, the fire inside is for you. He crept closer, his eyes straining against the darkness. There, draped over a split-rail fence, was a heavy hand-stitched quilt. In the moonlight, the colors were faded to shades of gray and silver, but the center square of the pattern was unmistakably dark, the sign of a safe house. He approached the back door, his hand trembling as he reached out to knock. He hesitated. If he was wrong, this door led back to the chains. If he was right, it led to the North Star. He tapped 3 times, slow, then fast, then slow again. The door creaked open just an inch. A sliver of warm orange candlelight cut through the mist, illuminating Samuel's terrified eyes. "You're late," the woman whispered. It was a woman's voice, gravelly and tired, but as steady as the earth itself. "The patrollers passed by an hour ago. Get inside before the moon gives you away." The sanctuary of shadows. Inside, the cabin felt like a cathedral of warmth. A small fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows across the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Martha, a freed blacksmith's wife, did not ask for his name. In this world, names were dangerous things that stayed behind at the border. "Eat," she commanded, pushing a wooden bowl of hot stew toward him. As Samuel ate, the heat of the food spreading through his weary limbs, Martha sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the dark woods outside. She didn't look at him. She spoke in a low, rhythmic tone, a voice designed to soothe a frightened soul. "The Maryland campaign has turned the roads to iron. The armies are clashing at a place they call Sharpsburg. They say the creek there is running red. You can't go by the main road. You must follow the water. The water doesn't leave a scent for the dogs, and it doesn't tell secrets to the wind." Samuel listened, his eyelids growing heavy. The crackle of the fire and the woman's steady voice acted like a balm. For a brief moment, the peril of the journey felt miles away. He was no longer a fugitive. He was a human being sitting by a fire. "Sleep now," she whispered, sensing his exhaustion. "The North Star is hiding behind the clouds for a while. It'll be there when you wake. You got a long way to go before you see the blue hills of Pennsylvania." Samuel lay down on a burlap sack filled with hay. As he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the last thing he saw was the flickering flame of the candle, a tiny earthbound version of the star that was leading him home. The rains of deliverance. The transition from the warmth of Martha's hearth back into the obsidian chill of the Maryland night was a slow, painful awakening. Samuel stood at the threshold of the back door, the smell of wood smoke still clinging to his threadbare coat. Behind him, the cabin was a fading ember. Ahead, the world was a void of shadow and mist. "The rain is coming," Martha whispered, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. "In this life, the rain is a blessing. It washes away the footprints. It silences the snap of the twig. Let it be your cloak." As Samuel stepped back into the thicket, the first heavy drops began to fall. They didn't fall in a torrent, but in a slow, steady cadence. Tap, tap, tap against the broad leaves of the oak trees. The sound was hypnotic, a natural white noise that seemed to push the rest of the world away. He began to walk. The mud between his feet was cool and slick, a reminder of the earth's ancient pull. He didn't rush. To rush was to invite a stumble, and a stumble in the dark could mean a broken limb or a noisy fall. Instead, he moved in time with the rain. Every mile felt like a lifetime. In the silence, Samuel's mind turned inward. He thought about the concept of North. To the men who owned the land, North was a political abstraction, a place of different laws and cold winters. But to Samuel,